Yo, what's up, everyone? It is my pleasure to be talking to Kenzie Brenna today. I'm just clarifying that I'm not on meth and I'm sweating because I've just been running. What up, Kenzie? Thanks for talking with me today.
Hi, Richie. I'm so excited to chat with you and also wanted to clarify that even if you were on meth, it's all good. We would figure that out. We would do this interview, we would do this conversation and we would figure it out. It might be a little bit fast paced, but I would try to match that up. I might have to have some coffee or something, but I would try.
I'd love that. That would be a good time. Maybe I'll hit up some of my ex-friends and be like, yo, what's
Yeah.
up? You got the hookup? A
So
surprising amount
good.
of my old friends used to smoke meth, which is sad, but I'm glad they don't do it anymore by and large.
Oh,
Regardless, I'm getting ahead of myself.
I love it.
I'm high on endorphins. I just had a really good run up some hills and set up for the day. But regardless, Kenzie, what's up? You are over in British Columbia, Vancouver,
Mm.
Canada. Um, you are a podcaster and content creator. You have a huge following on the gram, and I imagine a huge following on TikTok. I always thought I was too old to start my own TikTok account, but um, I imagine you're popular there too. And
I'm actually, no, I'm a bit of a loser on TikTok, which is great. Because I just started. So
right,
so I've got a lot of room to grow, but, uh, no, just yeah, Instagram is my favorite platform to be on. I was on YouTube for a while, but not the best. And then I feel like, and you must understand this too, podcasts are that weird in between where it's not a social media platform, but you're still putting out media, and that's also my favorite. But just Instagram for me. That's my favorite place. But people can come hang out on TikTok with me, but I'm not cool on there yet. Yet I'm working on it. I'm like a millennial on TikTok, so it's a Gen Z space. So I'm still figuring out how to master it.
well, I'm not quite, I'm in this very funny cutoff between millennial and Gen X. So
Mm.
I'm way too old for TikTok. So if you feel like you're on the cusp, I feel good about my decision not to get a platform there. You have really interesting conversations that I appreciate you coming on to talk about, because your key focus is on, I guess, eating disorder recovery
Mhm.
and body image and beauty myths. What Tell us your story, homie. Like, how did you start
Yeah.
talking about? Because if anyone goes checks you out your gram, it's very vulnerable. Both the imagery that you put out and also the conversations that you have. Why do you decide to tackle this so publicly? Because for anyone who's not seen you, you have like hundreds of thousands of followers that you're sharing all of this with. So what's behind that?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I can basically talk about how I can start off just by telling people like how I got to the place where I'm at today, as a good starting off point. And basically, in an eggshell, I have been dieting for most of my life since I was about 13, and I'm 31 now. And so that's what most of my life I've been spent, trying to control my weight and trying to do that by, controlling what I eat. That's the most simple way that I can put it into words. And I ended up, dieting, falling off forever until it was about 26. So about 5 years ago now. And I went on Instagram and I was like, I'm going to buy a workout program. And this is going to be I want this to be the last workout program. I want to diet and I want to get down to my goal weight. And I want to stay at that goal weight and I never want to have to diet again. So I bought a workout program online. And in order to be accountable, I started an Instagram account. And it was the first time that I had ever had peer support. And that was so life changing. For once, I felt like I was like part of a community. I wasn't dieting alone. I felt like I was like part of this large group of women that were so encouraging and so supportive. So I started spending a lot of my time on Instagram, and I started spending a lot of my time looking at my goal bodies, and that kind of consumed my life for about a year. And I got down to a lower weight, and I was really proud of myself. And I had tons of confidence because people were hyping me up. And then as most people know, when you are in a weight loss phase or you're cutting, you end up hitting a plateau. Your body kind of figures it out and they're like, nope, we're not doing this anymore. We don't want to lose any more weight. And I hit a plateau, which is what my coaches said that was going to happen anyways. But then when I hit the plateau and I saw that every day I was, I was hitting my macros and I was going to the gym and I was doing everything that I was instructed to do, but my weight was staying the same, all of the mental health stuff came back. Like I had a total meltdown and I fucking lost my shit. And I ended up saying like, how can this happen? Like I'm doing everything right. Like, why isn't my body following the rules? Like, why can't my body just do what it's supposed to do, which is I wanted it to lose weight. And then I did something on Instagram that I had never done before. And I looked up the hashtag self-acceptance. And I'd never looked at that hashtag before, anything like that. And this was back when like hashtags were cool and we were following them and like people were like going, this is like back when Instagram was also chronologically ordered. And for the first time I saw people, it was mostly women, but women and men and people that were just sitting and existing and sharing their bodies in a way that I hadn't seen before. And I was like, oh my God, how can you just like be so comfortable with yourself? Like that was such a foreign concept to me. How can you just be so comfortable in whatever size? Like, I'd been so disconnected and so uncomfortable in my own body for so long that this was just such a foreign concept. And then I went home and I felt like really inspired because I had this meltdown at my gym, and I went home and I felt inspired and I consumed all that content all night. And then the next night or the next day, I ended up, posting up my first ever photo of like me in my sports bra and my leggings. And this was very, very, very different than my usual content because at that point I was just posting up weight loss photos and I was just posting up before and after photos to show that I was working really hard to lose weight, and I was flexing in my photos, and I wasn't manipulating my photos at all, but I was definitely posing in them to show like, hey, I'm working on my body. I'm working on my body like constantly. And then I posted up a photo of just like, yeah, me in my sports bra, my leggings, just like sitting down, existing and saying like, this is who I am. And I was very accepting from the fitness community and it was great. And then slowly but surely I started to kind of chip away because the body positivity space was kind of new to me. And I was kind of like in this space of like, there's got to be some bullshit here. Like, you can't just say that like all dieting is bad, or you can't just say that you can be happy at no matter what no matter what your size is, or you can't say these things. And then slowly but surely, I just like started to do my own research. I started to make sense on my own of the information. And I started to kind of like figure out, not my own truth, but I started to just see like, okay, I see like what people are saying and like where it's valid and like where I think like some people might not be so valid. I just kind of don't touch, or I just like don't really explore too much. And then I just kind of like went on from there, and I had a couple of hashtags that went viral, which is what made my account grow. And now I kind of have conversations around body positivity and mental health and their own body image and eating disorder recovery and diet culture and all of the stuff now. But that's basically now where I am, and in regards to where I am online right now.
For a lot of people, is diet and mental health like intrinsically linked, and body size and mental health and trying to control one or the other? Are those two things really connected?
Yeah, they're very, very, very connected. They were connected for a long time, I would say, by predominantly by women, but the more that we have made men become quite obsessed over their physiques and over the way that they look as well, men are definitely catching up in that area for sure. But for definitely for women, a lot of their self-esteem comes from how they look. A lot of it comes from how they look. And that affects our own mental health. It affects how, we feel happy or sad about our bodies. And it affects our confidence, whether or not we are feeling bold and brave to be able to speak up in conversations or to raise our hand in classes or anything like that. And a lot of the time when we diet, we get complimented, and
Mm.
especially if we lose weight. Like it's a very affirming process, and it feels very safe to diet in terms of it's very socially acceptable to diet, and it's highly praised. And so it's something that can make us feel really happy, but it's kind of that like short-term happiness versus long-term happiness. And it's a happiness that's completely extrinsic. So it's like we rely on external factors for it to make us happy. So we're relying on that validation from other people. We're relying on other people to notice that we've lost weight. We're relying on other people to tell us like, oh, hey, good job choosing whatever, celery juice in the morning instead of a bagel, whatever it is. Instead of it being more intrinsic, instead of it being something that we're rewarded because the act is rewarding in and of itself, because it aligns with our values or our morals or our ethics. So I would say for sure they're very intrinsically connected, and they definitely influence one another.
I read a English journalist and author's book called Lost Connections. A guy called Johan Hari, who I reference all the time. I think he's like really cool. And
he's great. Oh my God, obsessed.
Yeah. Well, have you read that work? And he talks about, was it Lost Connections or was it Chasing the Scream? Either of his books. And he talks about, there was a clinic that worked with people who were clinically obese, and a lot of them turned out to have lived histories of like sexual trauma or abuse or really dysfunctional childhoods. And the weight was a subconscious like defense mechanism from being seen in the world. Is that like a familiar theme in the conversations that you have online?
Yeah, for sure. That hasn't been my personal experience, but for some people, definitely. I know that I have had friends that have felt like it's safer for them to be at a higher weight because they get noticed less, and that's more comfortable for them instead of getting noticed more. But I do want to say that, like, and for your listeners, if they're not familiar with the term fat, because the term, if I ever say fat person or fat woman or anything like that, I'm not using it as a pejorative. I'm not using it as a slur. It's a term to just describe a body type. That might be a little bit jarring. I know that feels a little bit jarring sometimes for people to hear because we've just used it as a way to put down other people. But there are communities that are kind of taking that word back and kind of, making it something that they're more empowered by. So just for your listeners to kind of know how I'm speaking.
I really appreciate you saying that, because I don't even know what language to use. Like, when I approached you for an interview, I was nervous about saying something that might be offensive, like by mistake. So thanks for clarifying that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like, language is very, very, very tricky right now. And I think that there's a space of language that's very obvious that we don't use, language that's, dead language, or language that is very clearly only used by specific communities. And then there's language that's like, words that are in like a gray area. And I have so much grace and compassion if like anybody quote unquote fucks up or anything like that. I don't even think that you and I really believe in that. And so you don't have to worry about me being offended. It's a little bit hard to offend me. I'm like, I have a pretty sick sense, and I have like a pretty good, I've got pretty good, yeah.
You're getting like ultimate inside voice version of me right now. Right?
Yeah, perfect.
This is like me talking to my grandma,
Yeah. You don't have to do that. No, we can shoot the shit and pretend we're at a pub or something.
Cool.
Yeah. But yeah, I do want to say regarding just coming back to fat people putting on weight, or people putting on weight to be less noticeable, that's not everyone's experience. And a lot of the time, because we really, and I mean this earnestly, Richie, but we really have dehumanized fat people so much that a lot of the time, in order for us to feel okay or with them, or in order for us to feel like we can accept them, we need some sort of sob story. Like, we need to almost infantilize them, or we need to say like, oh, see, look, like, oh, they're fat because they're like insecure, instead of it being like, no, sometimes people are literally just fat. That's it. They're just fat, and there isn't a mental health condition, or there isn't a mental illness, or there isn't much else behind it. They are just fat. And so I do appreciate people who have put on, who are putting on weight, and it's kind of like semi-intentional, where they're like, I get noticed less, people harass me less, or people look at me less, they sexualize me less, and that might feel safe for them. But it's not everybody's experience.
Yeah, which really speaks to how fucked up like living in a really sexist rape culture is, right? Like the fact that you will
Yeah.
subconsciously change your body to be noticed less, and then you'll be critiqued by that culture and criticized by that culture and be seen as less attractive. And yet, if you go the other way, then you have to potentially deal with like street harassment and catcalling and like, you know,
Mhm.
incessant objectification. It's like
Yeah.
you can't win.
Yeah. And particularly it does happen. It definitely, I want to say, like, it definitely does happen to men, and it's not entirely gendered, but it does happen to women more, being catcalled and having their bodies sexualized and whatnot. It obviously does happen to men, but it happens at a lesser degree. And it definitely.
Well, also, I think about that because there's not the power differential physically between
Mhm.
men and women, right? So if a
Mhm.
car full of women yells some shit or beeps a horn, there's not the implicit fear that that might lead to violence or sexual assault for the majority of men. I'm sure there are some men who might feel scared. I can speak from personal experience that when I've gone running and I've been in and girls have like beeped their car horn at me, I am socialized to find that like cool. Like I'm like, yep, still got it. Because I'm not scared of anything. Whereas if the role was reversed in a culture where women are routinely harassed and we have endemic rates of sexual violence and men's violence towards women, I totally get why it's like a different, like the experience is different. Is that fair to
Totally.
say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like, yeah, I completely, yeah, I definitely appreciate that. And it actually just even adding in a layer of this, for particularly for women who are fat, who have gone through sexual assault, they're believed less. And there's also tons and
Mm.
tons of judges on on record that you can actually find saying that, commenting on their weight, and either saying that they should be flattered, or that this girl, they would say something along the lines of like, this girl or woman is fat, but she has a pretty face. So it makes sense why someone would be interested in her. Like there is like the weight always, always comes into factor. Always. It is never not something that isn't influencing a part of a fat person's life. And so I think that that's something that I feel very impassioned to talk about as well on my platform, and just like with people in general, not like literally not all the time, because
Yeah.
there's just so many so
Not
many
when you're
topics.
ordering your coffee. Yo, what's
Yeah,
up?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it is definitely an interesting space where, and I know that some people, like I'll talk to some people, and people who are kind of getting introduced to this like world where, just fat people are, disrespected and dehumanized like quite a bit. And they'll think kind of like, they'll say like, it can't be like that bad or anything. And I understand totally where they're coming from. But then having a couple of conversations, they kind of like, the veil is lifted, and that's also how my experience was too, when I was like going from the fitness world to like when I stopped dieting, when I realized that like, dieting like never led to like my health or happiness. If anything, it decreased my happiness and it decreased my health. Where I was like, wow, there is bullshit. There is bullshit, and there's definitely bullshit to uncover. And it's kind of like, once you lift the veil, you don't go back. Like, and I'm sure that you felt the same way when with certain things like politically, where you find stuff out and you're like, yep, now you see the truth almost in a way.
Yeah, I find myself in this really weird position where I can see lots of different perspectives all at once. And
Yeah.
whereas I used to be, I put myself through university in my 20s after traveling a fair bit in Latin America. And I was really struck by the endemic poverty of First Nations peoples there. And,
Mm.
little kids would come up and lick your plate in the middle of the night. It really, really hit me emotionally. So when I decided to go back to university, because I got sick of working kind of dead-end jobs,
Mm.
I studied and looked at things through a very left-wing lens solely.
Mm.
And I really othered people on the other side of the political spectrum, and felt that you were a bad person if you voted differently or you had different conceptions of how to address social injustice. But as I've gotten older, and also gone on to work like professionally and in advocacy with like really disadvantaged groups of people, I found it's way more complicated than good and bad and black and white.
Mm.
And it has really shifted how I view the world and how I experience the world, and also how I try and lead conversations. I used to really like, you're a fucking bad person, you fucking blah, blah, blah. I used to be really painful. When I think back of how I used to talk about political issues, I was very self-righteous, and it didn't
Mm.
actually bring people into the conversation. All it did is create an us and them. And I think now we actually need to learn to not just pander to our tribe and the people who already get it, but actually, how do I adjust my language? How do I temper my passion and my maybe justifiable anger or hurt or rage to open this conversation to people who either are ambivalent or are on the other side of the debate? Because
Mm.
if my goal is to say create a healthier conception of masculinity, or my goal is to end men's violence towards women, or improve mental health outcomes, or help people shift away from using drugs and alcohol as a coping mechanism, making them feel like shit it's not gonna do it, right?
Yeah. I'm so with you on that. Have you ever heard of the term integral left?
I haven't, but could you please drop some knowledge on me? Because I want to know about the integral left.
Yeah. It's a term that I found back in January, and it's the first political term that I've ever felt like actually helps describe me and my politics, because I'm very, very, very left. I'm very, very, very left. I really believe in like socialized healthcare. I like think that
Yes.
universal basic income is great. I'm
Yes.
like I want everybody to be taken care of. I think
Me
that that
too.
is a fucking very important thing.
Uh,
And I also felt like, particularly being on the left and being so heavily involved in feminism, that I'm also an atheist, and atheism has been kind of important to me in the last few years, with just like shifting my framework more into being kind of like anti-ideology, and like, kind of being more critical. And I have found that
mm,
in leftist spaces, and within feminism, that I started to find that I was like, this is very puritanical. This is it's getting more and more orthodox, and this is starting to feel very similar to Christianity, where you have a set of rules, and if you don't abide to them, you're sinning, and you are born a sinner. And anyways, so I found myself to be questioning where I was like, how I just found that things were becoming so orthodox, and that you couldn't explore alternative political, not even alternative, just like different ideas, different perspectives, that like that was kind of shunned. And then this term that I came across, integral left, is when you side mostly leftist, but then you are integrating different politics into your leftist space, and you're basically trying to find out what truth exists in different political spaces, and then you're figuring out a way to integrate it into your own perspectives and beliefs that you currently have now. And I was like, that is literally that is so freeing. That's so great. That's so freeing. And that allows me to explore different political spheres without being committed to them. And also just as like seeking truth, like what is true about what these people are saying, like, is there anything? If there's nothing, then okay, then there should be no problem exploring it. But if there is something, then it's worth talking about. So that's kind of where I lean. And I think that you're also kind of similar, where you're just interested in like talking and listening and like trying to like be open and aware, and like, and yeah, and shaming people is the worst tactic. Shame requires a coping mechanism. When we shame people, when we put them into a place of shame, they have to cope with it. And it's like, I'm not quite sure that's the best way forward when we're all like trying to create a better world. So shaming people who like, quote unquote, don't know better, or shaming people who you want to be more politically aligned with you, it doesn't, it doesn't work. And so that's also like, not to go on too much of a tangent, but that's also where and why I feel so open about, not canceling people who are dieting, or like not shunning people who diet, or not shunning people who lose weight, because I want them to know that they have a space in the community, that they're not disposable, that they're here, and that they're human beings, and that I like care about them, even if I don't think that what they're doing is actually going to lead to health or happiness, that like they matter, and that they are allowed to do whatever they want with their bodies, that they have choice, and I accept their choice. So that was a mouthful, but basically I align with you and I support what you're,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, well, right back at you. This is nice because I went through this whole period of like feeling. Have you ever read the essay "Excommunicate Me from the Church of Social Justice"?
Yeah, by Francis Lee.
Something like that. Yeah, it is Francis
Yeah.
Lee, who I've never read anything else by, but I think I found her on Facebook and was like, "Yo, your essay is the shit." Like, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you described, there is like a real religious orthodoxy to the current way a lot of the modern online social justice space communicates, and you have to use the right jargon, and there, do you know what I mean? Like there's a whole culture around it that if you don't fit into, you
Totally.
you get punished, and you get shamed, and you get made fun of and ridiculed, and it,
Yeah, and that's honestly how I felt when I wasn't being a good dieter. Like when I wasn't dieting hard enough, and when I wasn't fit enough, and when I wasn't
mm,
enough, like I struggled with that so much. Like I'm a very, very active person. I always have been, like, playing outside, soccer, horseback riding, doing different classes and stuff. Like I've just always loved being active, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I have what's considered an athletic body. But I've always enjoyed going to the gym, always enjoyed, walking over, taking transit. Like that's just been something that's come to me quite naturally. And I've always felt that like in fitness spaces that I was like, oh, I'm not good enough to be here. People like, I don't look the part. And I think that one of the biggest things for me is trying to create spaces where people don't feel like that whole, like, you're not enough, or you're not good enough, or you need to do more, you need to be better. It's like, isn't that just the whole point of life, is just like we're just all trying to be better right now? So can we just like not can we just like not put extra stress and pressure on people? It's just, I don't know if it works. I don't know if it works.
no, it definitely doesn't. Like I used to work in alcohol and drug harm reduction, and most people who are in recovery already carry heaps of shame and pain. And if you walk into a room full of people trying to change how they live or how they cope, how they experience the world, and place more shame on them, you're just gonna like push them further into the hole. And I think it's the same with diet culture, and I think the same with how we talk about politics. Shame is not a good teacher. Guilt might be, like if
Mm,
we, because guilt is, I feel like we feel bad implicitly for an action we took, and then we can learn from that, hopefully, and then redress the behavior and then change. Whereas shame is like externally heaped upon us, and
mhm,
it becomes like internalized in how we see ourselves. Like
mhm,
instead of I did a bad thing, it becomes I'm a bad person, and that just keeps us stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out. Do you know what, but does that make sense?
Oh yeah. And one of our biggest coping and like I think that shame always needs a coping mechanism. Like we always because shame is painful. And I don't think it's a type of motivating pain. I think it's a type of isolating pain. I think it's a pain that keeps us very much in the dark. And when we do that, we cope. So we cope with sex or drugs or food or Netflix or TikTok or whatever it is
Or
that
all at
like
once.
or
All
or
at the
all at
same time.
once.
I'm just gonna get on Netflix, smoke some meth,
Yeah.
text up my ex-girlfriends. What up?
Yeah. Be on TikTok while having sex and like eating a burger, like just all of it all at once.
All
Oh
at
my
once.
God.
It kind of
My
sounds like a good time, to be honest.
brain
But
would explode. Like
yeah.
all of my dopamine receptors would just like pop all at once. They just like wouldn't know what to do. But yeah, no, I think that like, we need to cope and then our coping mechanisms tend to cause more shame. We don't usually cope in ways we're proud of. We cope in ways that are trying to meet a need. And it creates that cycle again. And it's like, we got to break the pattern. We got to break the cycle. And I'm very, I'm definitely, I try to like not shame people as much as possible. And it's so interesting because people will hear that. This is what pisses me off, Richie. People will hear that and then they'll say something along the lines of like, well, you think that Harvey Weinstein shouldn't feel shame? Like they take the most extreme, egregious example. And I'm like, that's a great question. Do you think that do you even think that Harvey Weinstein feels shame? Two, do you really think that everyone is Harvey Weinstein? That like, if you take the perpetrator, the person who's abused their power, like we don't all have that. That's not everyone. And even if it's like, yeah, that one person, go ahead, like shame them, whatever, it doesn't matter. That doesn't mean that we should be doing it to everybody. But again, it's that like binary thinking that like, well, everybody's bad or everybody's good kind of thing. And it's bullshit.
I really appreciate you saying that, because fucking people do come up with the most egregious example. Because I've got this discourse going on right now on my own little social media channels. I'm like, let's try and talk with people and not judge people, and like people who think differently aren't your enemy. And then it's always someone on Facebook be like, well, I'm not going to talk with a Nazi. It's like, well, I'm not
Yeah.
saying you literally have to talk to a Nazi, or like,
And
like,
that's, yeah.
they always, instead of like maybe your uncle who voted conservative, but not like David Duke, like it's
Right.
people. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, exactly. And I
it's
think that
crazy.
that's also very telling. And that shows people that we are actually lumping in everybody into good or bad spaces. That this idea that you are either pure, you're all good. So coming back to that orthodox feeling that like we are doing things that the church did where we were putting everybody in as good, or if you voted conservative then you're all completely bad, then you've sinned and you're done and you need to repent for your sins, and if you don't then you stay a sinner. And it's bullshit. It's bullshit. And I think that when people do stuff like that, I try to remind them that I'm like, there's a lot of complexity here, and there's a human inside of people that you're not seeing. And I'm not saying that means that everybody has to go and talk to their conservative uncle or anything like that. It just means nuance. Like nuance actually exists. My dad for the last few years has he's become increasingly conservative, and it's been very interesting because I haven't been. I'm not conservative, and I've never been conservative, but he and I have such an open relationship, and he's been more conservative because he's like constantly listening to these messages saying that he's bad. He's a white, straight, cis man, and he's bad. And my dad is, I don't need to go into like my family stuff, but like my dad doesn't have, he doesn't have stuff. He's not powerful. He's like a very like regular dude who doesn't, I just like can't even go into it, but he's just a single human being, just a single human being. And he doesn't have much. I'll say that. He doesn't have much. And for him to constantly have this, for him to constantly hear, you have power that other people don't, and you need to give up that power, and you are a bad person by just inherently existing. He doesn't have his own framework of nuance to say, like, okay, I understand what they're saying. If I take an intersectional lens to this, I get where people are coming from. I understand that there's a difference between me and other people, even if I don't have much, even if I don't have inheritance or savings or anything, even if, all of those things. He doesn't have that framework. So all that he hears all day is just, not all day, but when he goes online, he just hears that he's bad, that he isn't, it's not okay for him to exist as he is. And he doesn't understand it. And so he's actually has sought out community online that has been incredibly conservative. And I've watched it happen and I'm like, oh my God,
Yeah.
this is amazing. Social media can really radicalize people like
That happened
fairly
that
quickly.
massively. I've seen it happen big time. It's happened to someone in my family who was like very progressive and left wing, and I don't know, went through a bunch of stuff and then was like consuming like horrible, like alt-right shit on the internet all of a sudden. And I'm really happy now because he's got zero social media and there's come back to like at more of a center ground. But I saw them go
Mm,
down the rabbit hole. I've seen that
mhm.
happen a few times, like because when you're shamed and when you're attacked and you're made to feel like shit by your old tribe, you're like, well, fuck it, I'm gonna go find a new tribe because humans we are tribal creatures. Like we need to feel like we
Totally.
belong to someone and something. And if
Totally.
we will shift ourselves to fit into that. And
Oh my God, exactly.
that's kind of where I get frustrated with the whole, cancel culture approach to doing justice, is that it's counterproductive and not pragmatic. It actually
Mhm.
creates more division and hurt and potentially radicalizes people on the other end of the spectrum. You will take someone in a moderate position who might have done a misstep, or they said something stupid, or maybe they've done something bad. Maybe they have committed a crime and hurt people, and push them out of the center ground and further down to the, I don't know, the fucking incel community or something. Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and I do, yes. Oh my God. I'm so glad we're having this conversation because it's something that I've thought about quite a bit, is that like when we do start to shame people, when we do push them out of our social spaces, it does force them to find other social spaces that will accept them because
Yes.
you're a human being. And say, this is like kind of like Johan Hari has talked about, just like we have needs and we will try to figure out a way to get our needs met, even if it's not in the healthiest or best ways. And one of our needs is the need to be social. Like we cannot live without social connection. We can't do it. And when we are getting exiled, when we are getting pushed away from, let's say, family or friends that we used to have, or coworkers or peers or whatever it is, well, what's the better what better place to go find community than going online where you get to Google whatever the hell you want. You can find a Facebook group for honestly anything, and you can find people who will understand you and who will listen to you and who are saying things that you've been thinking. Like we will find community. Look what I did when I went online to go find a weight loss community. I immediately found one on Instagram. Like it that's the beauty about being online, is that we are connected to so many different communities. And the dark side of that is that we're connected to so many communities that may not be the healthiest communities, that might not have values that are actually shared that are great for humanity. They might be values that only are serving to that group and that group only. And it doesn't actually cross apply to many other communities. And I just, yeah, watching that has been just such a lesson and such a beautiful lesson for me to remember to not do that to other people. And that doesn't mean that, again, like, because I know people will listen to this and they'll say something along the lines of, they'll say something like, well, it's not our job to make other people comfortable. They'll say something like, it's not our job to placate, to babysit, to make sure that people get it, and all
To
of
do
those
the
things.
emotional labor. Yeah.
Yeah. And I understand that. And I do want to say that like self-responsibility is really important, that people are responsible for the actions that they take. If you know, if someone's going to join an incel group, or someone's going to go join some I don't even know, like anti-vaxxer 5G, whatever it is, Facebook group, whatever it is, I do want to say that of course they have responsibility over their actions, absolutely, and it does exist with the social pressures that they also face. So it's not an either or, it's a both and.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really nice take. You're very educated. You put yourself through higher education?
No, I haven't, but thank you, that means a lot. Thanks, Richie, that means a lot.
Well, I'm not saying it to gas you up. Like, I mean, I am gassing you up, but it's you clearly you clearly read widely and listen, and I'm curious to know, like, if you had an academic history, what that was. Yeah, it's very strange. I think about a lot of the justice space, and I spend a lot of my time talking about this at the moment. I'm kind of fucking obsessed with it. My partner is like, dude, you need to chill the fuck out and just like, like stop reading about all these issues. But I find it confusing that we have like this, say, desire for, say, reforming the criminal justice system and being anti-incarceration and looking, I don't think defund the police is a very good name for a movement, because regular people don't get it. They're like, what? No cops? But if we actually looked at like, more social workers and pathways to addiction treatment and positive interventions instead of straight to law enforcement, that's a wonderful concept. And that the same ideological set of people will be the most brutal and vicious on the internet, or at least on mainstream platforms. Because what I've noticed happen is that, right-leaning people, or the alt-right, or, the Proud Boys and actual Nazis and hate mongers have got alternate web platforms. They go on, 8chan, and they're using Telegram, and it gets really dark. And that means that there's never any cross-pollination of ideas and no way to bring people back, because you're just it's like you're in a gang. You get we have a gang, we have a pretty endemic gang issue here in New Zealand, and it's often now people of color who have a history of colonialism and economic exclusion and trauma and all the things that comes with that, and that's who makes up the majority of our gang culture. But it makes perfect sense, like, you hang out, real recognizes real, right? Like, you hang out with people who see you. And I think that's the same as extreme left and extreme right. And I really wish we could bring people together, man. I know I sound like a hippie right now, like, come together, but
No, I hear you. Yeah. I think that you said that. Yeah. You said that so perfectly. Like, real recognizes real. And I think that like people do seek that for sure. You can't not. And, I just, that desire to be social and to be seen by other people who get it. It's sometimes how I feel too with, I've gone through like, for instance, like I've gone through self-harm, and that's been like something that has very much like I've needed to find other people who have gone through similar experiences, so that way I can talk to them about it, because I can't talk so openly about that on social media, because that's like it's pretty intense, but it's I mean, I did something controversial where like I refused to put trigger warnings on my self-harm scars, and people were pretty upset with me for that. But I have looked into the research, and I just anecdotally as well, like trigger warnings actually don't work
I was just
as
going to
much
say
as
that. I was
they
reading
don't
some
work.
research the other day that, like, trigger warnings, they've become like a meme. for like conservative people, be like trigger warning, and B, they're not
Yeah.
effective.
Yeah, no, not effective at all. And they they're not effective. They actually can make things worse by actually letting your brain know that something potentially dangerous is up ahead. So you already become in the fight or flight or freeze response mode. And and people blaze through them. They don't actually work. They don't listen to them. So I don't put trigger warnings on my self-harm scars because I also just don't think that we need to put warnings on bodies. I think that that's fucking completely ridiculous, and people have a really big problem with it. But that's okay. They can have a problem with it. It's totally fine. But I've needed to seek out communities that where we can talk about, our experiences with self-harm, because it's been important for me to be able to be seen and also relating. Oh my God, having someone say something and for me to say, that's exactly how I feel, is so cathartic, and it does create that sense of I'm not actually alone in this. Even if in those darkest moments I feel like I am, I'm actually not. So I think that that desire for community is just, it's really heavy. And I think we underestimate it. It's very much, it's there.
Yeah, and I've got to be mindful to not create an echo chamber for myself.
Mm,
I've noticed that as I've shifted how I talk about things and what I talk about, I obviously attract an audience of a similar value set, right? And then someone might, say something fucking horrible to me, and I'll be like, I'm not going to engage with you. I'm just going to block you, right? And I don't want to
right.
I'm not just gonna. I want to be careful to distinguish between being harassed and abused online and being critiqued and criticized
Mm,
online, or at least my ideas. Like if you attack
mhm.
me as a person, I'm not that cool with that. But if you attack my ideas, then I'm cool with that. I'm happy to read that and try my best to absorb that and appreciate your difference. Yeah, it's an interesting one though, right? Like otherwise, because we can create these safe little bubbles, but then we're creating part of the problem that we're talking about. Hey, I wanted to ask you something. I'm a Muay Thai coach and personal trainer as much as I do, work around masculinity and mental health and stuff. And
Mhm.
so that's a very different culture to the sort of shit that we're, getting into right now. And sometimes I will talk about weight loss. Our sports weight restricted, you have to meet certain weight classes. And then as a personal trainer, sometimes people hit me up and they want to learn how to lose weight. And I've had some pushback about that as like body shaming people or, health at any size. And I'm curious to know how someone has that conversation. Like, is it all right to promote losing weight if you want to lose
Mhm.
weight?
Mhm.
Like I'm not quite sure how to do that. And you might not
Yeah.
have the answer, and you could be like, this is stupid, I don't want to talk about that, and that's fine too. But I'm curious, as when there are links. Well, we have a huge obesity problem in New Zealand, particularly with our underprivileged communities, right?
Mhm.
And it's killing people, or at least it's a
Mhm.
contributing factor to marginalized people dying early. How do we talk about that and at the same time not recreate these damaging tropes around body size?
Yeah, excellent question. Not definitely not a stupid question at all. It's a complex question, and it is going to it requires like a couple of layers, but it's a very important one because you said something that is undeniable, and that's people at a higher weight um, tend to have more risk factors for certain physical health conditions. That doesn't mean that they are exclusive to people who are at a higher weight, because thin people can be fucking unhealthy as shit. So it's not like it's just fat people going to the hospital, ladies and gentlemen, and humans. It's literally everybody. So I just have to put that out there. But yeah. So I don't think that we need to shame people for it is very hard to introduce not dieting to people who've never heard of that before. Like if I came to you as a personal trainer back when I was in my early 20s and I was like, hey, I want to lose weight. And you were like, have you ever thought about not dieting? I would have thought, okay, you're a fucking idiot. I'm going to go over here to a guy who knows what he's talking about. You know, like you have to kind of pick and choose your battles. You have to figure out like who your audience is. And that requires like a lot of sensitivity to say like, where is this person coming from? Why do they want to lose weight? Are they wanting to lose weight because they want to look a certain way? A lot of the times that's because they want, to be validated. They want to, they want to be loved a little bit more. Maybe it's their parents or their partner or their friends or their peers who have been kind of like on them about it. So that's one reason why some people lose weight. Other people want to lose weight because they want to feel better. That's a big part, is I just want to feel better. I want to have more energy. I want to have better sex. I want to be able to walk up the stairs and not be so out of breath. I just want to feel better. And I think both of those require a conversation with clients, and that requires a little bit of vulnerability, both on the trainer and both with the client, to say like, what are your goals right now, aside from weight loss? Like what does weight loss represent for you? And if it's health or if it's social validation, then those are the conversations to have. And I think that like, it's not about, again, like it's not about making it black or white. It's just about adding nuance, saying like, I can help you achieve your goals. And also there's a mental health component to this. And there's a social health component to this, working on our relationships, working on our relational health, and working on our mental health is just as important as working on our physical health. And so having those conversations, I think, is really important to kind of plant the seeds that this isn't the only tool in your life to make it better. And that weight loss has never miraculously made someone's life so much better to the point where everything falls into place and they don't have to think about anything ever again, right? Like it doesn't happen with that. When it comes to the physical health part of it, like when it comes to like, I want to wake up and I don't want to be so tired and I feel sluggish throughout the day and stuff, a lot of that doesn't actually have to have a weight loss approach to it. A lot of that has to come with health behaviors. So that has to do with like things that we're putting into our body. That requires how much water we're drinking, what sleep we're getting, what we're doing, how much time we're spending on our phones, whether or not we're exercising. Like, our energy levels or the reasons why we don't have great mobility or anything like that have so many different factors that come into it. So again, like picking and choosing when to like have those conversations with your clients is like totally up to you. I don't think that like going like, having like an anti-diet approach immediately will probably be very effective, considering that most people haven't heard of the health at every size movement or haven't, been introduced to not dieting. So, but I think like having comprehensive conversations like this to just talk about like health behaviors in general, to just make more, to just add some more depth to health. Like health is not just weight loss. And that for sure, like it's not, it's like losing weight isn't the cure for stuff. It's not the be all and end all. And so making sure that like people just are at least having that seed planted in, I think is just like a great first step for everybody. Because there are a bunch of thin people walking around who feel tired as well, who also can't walk up a flight of stairs without gasping. It's like their cardiovascular systems sometimes might not differ that much more than like a fat person who's actually like exercising quite regularly and like eats maybe a more nutritious diet than like the thinner person. So it's context, and there's like nuance there. But I definitely think like planting the seeds is like really, really helpful. And not saying like no, I'm not going to help you with that, but like helping them like, along the way. And then also just letting them know that like, weight loss is like one aspect of life. And because weight loss fails so often, it fails. We just cannot figure out a way to get people to lose weight and keep it off long term. That's like, there's no research that shows that like, yep, we can get people to lose weight in this way and keep it off forever. It doesn't exist yet. And until we do, we are stuck with the very harsh reality that like long-term weight loss is incredibly rare. And so I think that the best way to kind of like have conversations around it is just about talking about how to focus on health behaviors, which is eating and sleeping and hydration and how our social connections are and the types of environments that we're in, our stress levels, like all of those things. So I hope that kind of answered your question,
No,
but
no, no, it does. Yeah, and
okay.
it's
Okay, great.
it's a holistic approach. We have that here in a model called Te Whare Tapawha, which is Māori for like the four-walled whare, like the four-walled house. You know, we have like
It's beautiful.
we
Yeah.
have spiritual, physical, mental, and like community or family.
Yes.
A-
Yes.
And when one of those things is out of alignment, everything else is out of alignment. So what you're explaining
Yes.
makes a lot of sense to me through that framework, at least. Because if I'm sleeping better, if I'm off my phone more, if I've got good communication with my partner and my life is purposeful and I'm happier, chances are I'll probably lose weight as a side effect, right? Like, because I'm
Yeah,
not
for
leaning on
sure.
like bad. I'm not trying to stigmatize food that might be calorie dense and nutrition poor. I'm not going to lean on that to feel good. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think that's like an interesting point of reflection for us and for people who are listening is like, when we look at the statistics of fat people, a lot of fat people happen to be low income. They do happen. I mean, some people are just fat because they eat a lot and they're fat. Like that's it. But there are a lot of fat people who are low income, who have come from trauma, who have intergenerational trauma or acute trauma, whatever it is. They specifically, in the States, a lot, it is disproportionately people of color to white people. And I think that there is room to discuss that, what's going on that would, make people this size, and like what factors are contributing to that. Cause it's not the idea that like fat people are just lazy and they're eating at home. That's a trope that like needs to die. That's a misnomer. That is not it.
Yeah, yeah.
Like really. But
But
even if let's
no,
go
no, sorry,
ahead.
I'm cutting you off. You're the guest. People are sick of hearing about. People are sick of hearing my voice. Like, fuck this guy. Let
um
Kenzie talk some more. Let
no, not
Kenzie talk.
even.
Let Kenzie
Um
talk. Yeah, no, sorry. What you say?
um even even if, let's say, someone is fat and they are at home and they are being stereotypically lazy and they are eating in front of Netflix and they are ordering a large amount of food, what needs are they getting met in that moment though? Like what is going on where they feel the desire to do that? Because I would argue that something is happening where they feel like they cannot engage with it at all, to the point where they have to disengage and they have to be watching TV, they have to be on their phone, they have to be eating. Like I would look at that like, this is a human with unmet needs. And what could, because when you do see some, and I mean, you see this because you are in the fitness realm. When you see someone in their element, when you see someone in flow, when you see someone doing their thing, when you see someone who's on point with their life, it's magnetic. You're so attracted to them. You're like, this is incredible, and you revere them, and you're like, this is amazing. And I would say that any person, regardless of body size, if they are disconnecting and engaging way more on their phone or way more in TV or with food or with drugs or with sex than they are with anything else in their life, it's because something deeper is going on. But we never, ever, ever give that perspective to fat people. We never do it. We might do it with addicts. We might do it with alcoholics. We might do it with people who who are leaning into just other negative spaces. But like with fat people, we don't do it as much. But there are deeper things going on, and there is a human being, and there are just other factors that are coexisting.
That's beautiful. That's a powerful reflection. Thank you. I
Mm-hmm.
I was going to interrupt you and say that you're talking about poverty and the over representation of, I feel awkward saying it, fat people, people who are
Mm-hmm.
obese in
Mm-hmm.
economically marginalized neighborhoods. But there is research that calls those neighborhoods obesogenic. There's more fast food available, there's less fresh food available. junk food is infinitely cheaper than
Mhm.
like food that's more nutritious, more alcohol, and more marketing of those shitty foods, which is designed to make you consume them. So yeah, I think those structural issues need to be talked about at more of a macro political level. Like, if you live in a
Yeah.
gentrified neighborhood, you got like the designer cafe with some like keto fucking bullshit on the menu and your organic greengrocer. It's not the same if you're like in the hood.
Yeah, yes, exactly, Richie. That's such an important thing for people to think about. And like when you are saturated with all of that food is designed to be as addictive as possible. It has like been created with something called the bliss factor where it's perfectly salty, perfectly sweet, and the fat and the carb ratio is it's perfect, and you cannot find that food. I'm going to use this term for lack of a better word, but like in the wild, like you can't find it. But we've like figured out a way to create it here in captivity. We've figured out a way to make food as tasty as possible, and with no micronutrients attached to it, and things that are macronutritionally dense but that don't have a lot of micronutrients attached to it. And a lot of people who live below a certain income level also struggle with time poverty. So they work jobs that have long hours. And it's like, I'm not, I don't want to prepare a bunch of fruit and vegetables for the week when I'm like exhausted. People don't want to do that. So, I really appreciate where you're coming from with this, and like having more of that holistic perspective is so important.
Yeah, time poverty is a big one. I think a lot of this comes back to like deep-seated anomie and disconnection that comes from living in a hyper-capitalist society, right? I know
Yeah.
I'm probably going off on a bit of a tangent here, but it's true, right? Like a lot of us,
Mhm.
whether you're rich or poor, work jobs that we don't like, and we're emotionally exhausted and spiritually bankrupt, and we've got fuck all time,
Yeah.
and so we just cope. And for some people, coping is food.
Yes. Yes, yes, totally. And that was very salient for me. As a kid, when I was 7, my parents got divorced, and there were a lot of ruptures that happened in the family that kind of cascaded from that divorce, and a lot of trauma happened. And immediately, like clockwork, like it was like in my blueprint, just started to eat, because food was specifically the type of food that I was eating. It was always predictable. I always knew how chips tasted. I always knew how chocolate tasted. So it was reliable, it was safe, it was comfortable, and I was able to find some predictability in chaos. And we moved around so much during that time when I was a kid, that I found out later on that hiding food and eating in private is something that kids do when they are in spaces that they're unfamiliar with. They find their little like nest, and then they're like, we're like chipmunks. We like bring our peanuts back to the nest, and we're like eating it. And so when I think of that, I'm like thinking of all of the other people who have also gone through certain things where they have also used food to cope. But it's there's a lot of shame that comes with it, because we're told with campaigns from a very young age that, like, eating these foods is bad. But at the same time, it's like you're like, if these foods are so bad, then why are they legal? Like, if these foods are so bad, and if we have campaigns that like constantly say that like you shouldn't be eating, and we have governments that say like we need to figure out a way to, regulate fast food. I'm like, what are we doing? Like, what's like, what's happening here? So, but yeah, it's a big coping mechanism, and the whole government regulation thing is like a whole other beast, because it's just like they're in bed with all of I just like it doesn't make sense. It's so hard to figure out where the responsibility is with that.
Yeah, word on. That comes back to that comment on capitalism, right? Like market
Mhm.
forces allowed to run rampant, and literally selling people a lot of poisonous food. Even with like, we talked about social media, like you've probably
Yes.
seen The Social Dilemma, and you probably read the Wall Street Journal article recently about how Facebook and Instagram are designed to be addictive for young people, but
Yeah.
there's no regulation in place to save us from ourselves. And yeah, sure, personal responsibility and taking ownership of one's behavior is part of the question. I would never have said that 20 years ago. But at the same time, in the broader environment of things, I think it's pretty much really, really difficult, near impossible, and depending on where you are in the social hierarchy, to avoid a lot of this damaging stuff, right? And I think governments do need to step up. I think community needs to come together, and this is, I guess, what brings us back to what we were talking about earlier about social division due to political polarization. If communities could come together and create a cohesive conversation and then a cohesive movement about encouraging and supporting government regulation of certain industries, whether it's social media or fast food, you'd get really positive outcomes. And I feel we spend so much time fighting over academic nuances, or like, but we're stuck in the culture war. Like, I'm really caught up in the culture war right now mentally.
Yeah, for sure. Like, caught up, like, who said what to someone online and who's getting canceled. And you're like,
exactly.
Dave Chappelle
Dave
canceled or
Chappelle
not
canceled. Like, I'm team Dave Chappelle, right? Like,
yeah, totally. I will say, like, I did watch his special to see what people were talking about, and I cannot argue that some of that shit is going to hurt someone. Like, I can't argue that. Like, there's no way for me to say, like, well, no, if you look at it like this, it's like I can't do that. But I will say that there are things that are interesting to discuss beyond that. Like, some of the things that he said regarding feminism, and some of the things that he said regarding, like, the Black community, in context to the gay community, and, like, the intersectionality of like, Black queer people. I do think some of that stuff is interesting to talk about. But that whole Dave Chappelle thing, I can't even touch it. I'm like, oh fuck, I'm out.
I think that's wise. I think that's really wise, because it's such like a powder keg, like
it is. And he just, like, the fact that he just there's that whole thing between, like, we're not canceling we're not canceling him. He's, like, worth millions and millions of dollars. We're, like, trying to get him to realize why he said what he said was wrong and stuff like that. And I don't know. Sometimes I'm just like, I think we're beating on a dead horse here. I don't think that this is,
I'll probably get canceled for saying this, but I truly didn't think what he said was designed to be hurtful and hateful. Rather, I really felt, and I rewatched it last night, I really felt he was not critiquing trans people or the trans community. He was critiquing the online abuse that comes with extreme social justice activism, like the sort of abuse that you and I have been talking about, that policing of behavior, that dragging of his friend that he mentioned, Daphne Dorman, who ended up killing herself. And that's where I really felt I felt that was the main thrust of the special. It wasn't about, and I look, I understand that I got all the privileges, right? Like, I'm an able-bodied cisgendered heterosexual dude. And while I have had, I had a really dysfunctional, traumatic childhood and stuff, but, like, that aside, for whatever reason, if I look at life through an intersectional framework, potentially it's been a little easier for me because of those things. So you can discount what I'm about to say or what I've said due to that. But also, I spend a good amount of my time reading broadly, and there are lots of different voices that are minority voices that don't read Chappelle's latest special the way of his critics. Even I've read articles from trans authors who are like, I don't see it the same way that a lot of his critics do. And it's like, where do you find the balance in that? Like, who is right about our reading of a body of work? Do we listen to the people who are hurt from the community, or the people who weren't hurt from the community? You know, I saw this interview with Flame Monroe. I don't know if you caught that on CNN.
Mm-mm.
She's a Black transgender comedian, and she was cool with it. Like, she acknowledged that it could be hurtful, but was like, I didn't feel like, as a Black trans woman, like, who we know have, you know, early rates of death and social exclusion and all this. She didn't feel it was problematic. So I don't know. I really struggled to know who do I listen to, you know?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that I struggle with for sure as well. And, you know, none of those jokes that he said to me could really hurt me. Like, he wasn't, I mean, he said that, like, you know, white women age faster. I'm like, yeah, that's so true. And like, but I'm not the one that's going to be affected by his jokes. And so I have to consider different perspectives and whatnot, similar to you, but it kind of comes back to that like integral sort of perspective where I try to not I try to hold two opposing perspectives at once to find out where maybe both of these things are true at the same time. Like, kind of like, not people who are anti-vax, but people who are vaccine hesitant, who are just like, you know what, I don't feel comfortable with the government regulating things that should go into my body. Like, people that are just like, something about this doesn't feel right, or something about this, like, I just wish that I had more time to decide. You know, and I want autonomy over my body, and I don't want people to tell me what has to go into my body. Holding that perspective, and then also holding the perspective of the frustrated people in healthcare who are watching people pass away from this virus, and watching people, you know, come in and need severe medical assistance because they're not being vaccinated, and listen to their exhaustion and their desperation for people to be vaccinated, and kind of hold those polarities at once, and try to hold them without canceling each other out, and try to see if there is a world where they actually both exist. But that requires us to not place people into categories, and that requires like a much more blended framework in order to look at something. And that is also required for us to like be slower. Like, we can't just like jump to conclusions. We have to like slow the fuck down and say like, oh, this is actually a little bit more complicated than just like, he's bad, therefore toss him to the garbage, or that person's bad, so like toss them out. It requires us to like slow down and actually look at things, like you said, with like nuance. And sometimes we just don't know like what's more true, what perspective is more true in that situation, or who do you listen to more. And yeah, so it's tough. I also struggle with it, and I don't know if there's always an easy answer.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are looking for easy answers, but I think
Yeah.
the truth of it
Yeah.
is that there are no easy answers. I think life is
Yeah.
inherently complicated and painful and
Hmm.
fractious, and we need to learn to hold two things. I think that's a sign of, I guess, maturity and healing and growth in some regards, is that when we can
Yeah.
hold seemingly opposing perspectives together at the same time,
Yes. Yes.
that's a good thing. Like, I know that as I've worked through my personal issues and
Yeah.
I've worked through my mental health, and I've just become a healthier person. I've identified less with my old ideological beliefs, right? Like, I haven't needed to
Mm.
be seen to be part of the right team as much as I
Mm.
used to. Like, I still want the same. I want to live in a world that's free of discrimination and gender violence, and there's less gap between rich and poor, and there's no racism and no homophobia. I still want all that sort
Yeah.
of stuff,
Yeah.
right? I still
Yeah, totally.
passionately want all of that, those things. It makes me sad that there are neighborhoods my friends can't hold hands in because they'll get beaten up, right? Like, I want them to end.
Mm.
But at the same time, I also understand that if you're not privy to a liberal arts degree and a
Mm.
higher education, and your world view is potentially going to be different, and you might hold some pretty ugly ideas, but I'm going to argue against your idea, not your worth as a person. I'm not going to throw you out because you've got shitty ideas, right? You're a human, like I'm a human, like they are a human. And how do we find our shared humanity? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Absolutely. Yeah. Like debating ideas and strategies versus actually debating whether or not this is a valid and worthy person, I think is much more effective. Much more effective. But that again requires us to separate the individual from their ideas. And that's hard for people because people collapse both of them into one. Like this person is this one, that's like coming back to the uncle that voted conservative. It's like that's who they are. Like we collapse them down to this one dimensional thing instead of actually peeling away. Like we're all kind of like Shrek. We're like this onion where we just have layers and layers and layers. But that it does, yeah, exactly like you said. And I think like, trying to find a way to bridge people and bridge communities is going to honestly be so helpful in the upcoming years when we do have more and more class wars, or we do have corporations against citizens, and like bridging, I think is like going to be a really important strategy for us instead of keeping things divided and keeping things unknown and not really understanding certain communities or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's what I liked about the Chappelle finish. That last 12 minutes when he eulogizes his friend, he finishes up with this appeal for empathy across identitarian lines, across class, across everything. I can see why you might. I'm trying to see how people can be so hurt by it, but I really felt that empathy was the big drive that he was appealing to us with. Hey, this has been real cool. I try and make this an hour-long show, but we've gone deep.
We went deep today.
Yeah, so like an hour and a half. This has been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule. You got your own podcast to be making and things to be doing. So I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your evident compassion and empathy with us. Thanks, Kenzie.
Yeah. Likewise, Richie, this has been so much fun and I look forward to chatting again with you.
Yeah, I would love that. Let's be mates.
Yeah.